My name is Leona Vale. I am 38 years old, and until 3 months ago, my stepfather, Marcus, believed my life's work was little more than a glorified and slightly misguided form of charity. For years, he had patronized my career with a dismissive sort of pride, the kind one reserves for a child's impressive but ultimately inconsequential hobby. That all changed on a rain-swept Tuesday morning when he broke down my office door and put me in handcuffs during a secure conference call with the United Nations. The look on his face when 3 unmarked diplomatic sedans slid silently to a stop in front of our quiet coastal home is a memory that doesn't haunt me, but rather serves as a quiet, somber monument to the day a lifetime of misunderstanding collapsed under the weight of truth. The man who held my life in his hands for a few tense minutes was forced to see, with brutal clarity, the person he had so profoundly underestimated. It was a power shift, but not one of victory. It was one of sorrowful, inevitable revelation. Growing up in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Washington, D.C., I was a child of diplomacy. My father, a career diplomat with the State Department, filled our home with maps, foreign languages, and a deep-seated belief that dialogue was the most powerful tool humanity possessed. He taught me that true strength wasn't about raising your voice, but about understanding the world so well that you never had to. He died of a sudden heart attack during a posting in Geneva when I was 12, leaving a void that felt as vast and silent as the international waters he so often traversed. His death didn't leave me with a desire to follow in his exact footsteps, but it instilled in me a profound sense of responsibility to the interconnected world he had shown me. My mother, Clara, a woman whose gentleness was her greatest strength, navigated our grief by surrounding us with books and art. She was a librarian, and she found solace in the quiet order of stories. For years, it was just the two of us. I excelled in my studies, focusing on international relations and humanitarian law, driven by a quiet but unyielding ambition to work in places where dialogue had failed and human dignity was on the line. When I was 19, during a summer home from university, my mother met Marcus Cole. He was a recently retired police detective, a man whose life had been governed by evidence, gut feelings, and the clear-cut authority of a badge. He was solid, commanding, and projected a sense of worldly certainty that my mother, lost in her quiet grief, found deeply grounding. Initially, I was wary. Marcus's world was one of black and white, of suspects and law-abiding citizens. My father's had been a world of infinite gray. To his credit, Marcus tried. He took an interest in my studies, though he often framed my passion in his own terms. "So, you want to go help people in those messed-up countries," he'd say, shaking his head. "It's a noble thought, Leo. But you can't fix the world." He seemed proud when I graduated with honors, introducing me to his old precinct buddies as my brilliant stepdaughter, the one with the big heart. It always felt like he was praising a laudable but naive character trait, not a formidable intellect or a professional ambition. After graduation, I joined Aegis International Relief, a non-governmental organization specializing in disaster response and humanitarian aid in conflict zones. My career began not in the field, but in logistics and strategy. My superiors saw in me a unique ability to analyze complex, volatile situations and design effective, life-saving interventions. I rose through the ranks quickly. By my late 20s, I was coordinating aid deliveries into war-torn regions. By my early 30s, I was a regional director, responsible for the safety of hundreds of aid workers and the distribution of millions of dollars in aid. It was around this time that Marcus's benevolent dismissal of my career began to curdle into something more pointed. When I'd visit home in Port Blossom, the quiet Pacific Northwest town they had retired to, his questions became more like interrogations. He'd hear me on late-night calls and comment the next morning, sounded intense. Trouble with the water filters again. When I was promoted to Deputy Director of Global Operations at 35, he attended a small celebration my mother threw. Afterward, he pulled me aside. "That's a fancy title," he said, a thin smile on his lips. "Does that mean you have a bigger office to push papers in now?" My mother would try to smooth over the tension. "He's proud of you, Leona. He just doesn't understand the corporate world." But I knew it wasn't about a lack of understanding. It was about a lack of control. My world was one he couldn't access, couldn't define, and couldn't exert his old authority over. So, he diminished it. I found myself sharing less and less, especially after I was promoted to Director of Global Crisis Response at 37, a position that put me in direct contact with world leaders, military commanders, and intelligence agencies. The role was so sensitive, my official title was often shielded behind more innocuous ones for security reasons. To Marcus, and by extension my mother, I was still just a senior administrator at a charity. The secrecy wasn't just for operational security, it became a shield for my own spirit. Last spring, circumstance forced my hand. A major water main ruptured in my Georgetown apartment building, causing catastrophic damage. The repairs were estimated to take at least 2 months. At the same time, a critical negotiation for a humanitarian corridor in the war-torn nation of Suriname was entering its final, fragile stage. I needed a secure, stable location to work remotely. My mother's offer was immediate and heartfelt. "Oh, please come stay with us, darling," she'd said over the phone. "The sea air will do good. Marcus has his workshop, and you can have the study. It will be lovely to have you home." I hesitated, the thought of navigating Marcus's quiet condescension for weeks feeling more exhausting than a trip to a war zone. But the alternative was a sterile corporate apartment, and the thought of my mother's garden and the sound of the ocean was a powerful lure. I accepted, packing my encrypted communications gear and secure laptop, and flew to the misty, green shores of Washington State. I moved into the guest room, a lovely space overlooking the Puget Sound, with walls the color of a soft sea mist. On the bookshelf, Marcus had placed a framed photo of me from my university graduation. It felt less like a memento of pride and more like a piece of evidence, marking the last time he felt he truly understood who I was. I didn't know it then, but this temporary return to the nest would unravel the carefully constructed piece of our family, exposing the depths of Marcus's insecurity and culminating in a confrontation that would irrevocably change us all. The first week in Port Blossom passed in a deceptive calm, like the glassy surface of the Sound before a storm. I set up my workspace in the spare room, which had a solid oak door and a view of the gray, moody water. I explained to my mother and Marcus that my work required concentration and confidentiality, and that when the door was closed, I was not to be disturbed. My mother, ever respectful, understood completely. She would leave a cup of tea outside my door in the mornings, a silent gesture of love and support. Marcus, however, saw my closed door not as a boundary, but as a challenge. His retirement had left him without a domain to command, and he seemed determined to make his home, and everyone in it, his new precinct. He began what he likely thought were subtle surveillance operations. He would suddenly need to check the fuse box in the hallway closet next to my room. He would start a loud project in his workshop, which was directly below me, forcing me to close the window and lose the sea breeze. During my second week, after a 3-hour secure video conference with my team in Geneva and our field operatives in Suriname, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen while I was making tea. "That was a long call," he said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. It was a posture I'd seen him use in old photos from his police days, the relaxed but unyielding stance of an interrogator. "It was a complex situation," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Sounded like it." "I heard you mention extraction corridors," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sounds a bit dramatic for a charity, doesn't it?" A cold knot formed in my stomach. He had been listening. "You must have misheard, Marcus," I said, turning to face him fully. "And I would appreciate it if you wouldn't try to eavesdrop on my calls. The situations we deal with involve vulnerable people. Their privacy is paramount." His face hardened. "This is my house, Leona. I'm responsible for what happens under my roof. Privacy is a word people use when they have something to hide." My mother entered from the garden, her hands full of lavender. "Marcus, please. Leona's work is important. We need to give her space." "Her work," he scoffed softly, turning his gaze to the window. "Right. Important." The next day, I returned to my room after a walk on the beach to find things subtly disturbed. A stack of files on my desk was slightly askew. The pen I always left parallel to my keyboard was now at an angle. It was his way of telling me he could get in whenever he wanted. It was a violation, quiet and insidious. That afternoon, I went to the local hardware store and bought a simple key lock for the door. I installed it myself. When Marcus saw it, a muscle in his jaw twitched. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any outburst. The lock only escalated his obsession. A few days later, he knocked on the door, then immediately tried the handle, rattling it when he found it locked. "Leona, open this door." His voice was low and commanding. I opened it a crack, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anxiety. "I'm on a call, Marcus." "What are you hiding in there?" he demanded, his face flushed. "What kind of humanitarian work requires a locked door in your own family's home?" "The kind that involves lives and confidential information," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Or the kind that's a complete fabrication," he shot back. "I was a detective for 30 years, Leo. I know when a story doesn't add up. All this secrecy, you act like you're running the CIA, but you're just coordinating supplies for some third-world country. It's an ego trip, isn't it? Makes you feel important." My mother rushed down the hall. "For heaven's sake, you two, stop it. This is supposed to be a peaceful house." "I need to get back to my call," I said, my hand trembling slightly as I went to close the door. "Of course you do," Marcus said with a sneer. "The fate of the world is at stake." I closed the door on his bitter laughter and leaned against it, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't just disrespect my work. He was actively trying to dismantle my reality and replace it with one that made him feel superior. That night, I placed a secure call to my direct superior, Simon Cale, the head of Aegis. "Simon, the environment here might be becoming a security risk," I explained, keeping my voice low. "My stepfather is intrusive." "Intrusive how? Is he a threat?" Simon's voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying concern. "He's a retired detective with a control complex. I don't think he's a foreign agent, but he's actively trying to find out what I'm doing. He doesn't respect boundaries." "We can move you to a secure facility at JBLM, Simon offered, referring to the nearby Joint Base Lewis McChord. "Not yet," I said. "That would create a family crisis and might make him even more suspicious. Let me try to manage it here first. I'll reinforce my digital security." The next morning, I discovered he had used his old police credentials to run a background check on Simon. He mentioned it casually at breakfast. "Your boss, Simon Cale," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Interesting background. Worked for the State Department for a while. Looks like he moves in some high-level circles for a charity guy." My blood ran cold. "Marcus, you cannot use your old connections to investigate my colleagues. That is a massive ethical and legal violation." He finally looked at me, his eyes like chips of ice. "I'm protecting my home from suspicious activity. You bring strange names and classified-sounding talk into this house. I have a right to know what's going on." The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. My mother was caught in the crossfire, her gentle attempts at mediation becoming more fraught. "He's just worried about you, darling," she'd whisper to me. "He was so proud at first. Maybe if you just told him a little more." "This isn't about pride, Mom," I told her gently, taking her hand. "This is about control. He can't stand not being the most powerful person in the room." "He'll calm down," she insisted, though her eyes were filled with a worry that betrayed her words. But I knew he wouldn't. He wasn't looking for information. He was looking for proof of his own narrative, that I was a fraud. And the more I protected my work, the more convinced he became that he was right. The situation was a tightening spiral, and I was running out of ways to keep it from crashing. By the third week, Marcus's intrusions had morphed from unsettling to overtly aggressive. I found him in my room one afternoon when I came back from a walk, holding my personal tablet, his fingers swiping across the screen. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. He didn't look guilty, he looked righteous. "I'm conducting an investigation. As a former officer of the law, I have a responsibility when I suspect duplicity." "You have no authority here, Marcus. That is my private property. Put it down." "I'm looking at your calendar," he said, ignoring me. "Meetings with UNSC liaisons, calls with someone at The Hague." "Leona, what is this nonsense? Are you involved in some kind of scam?" Using a charity as a front? He tossed the tablet onto the bed. Either you're a criminal or you're pathologically dishonest about your own importance. Which is it? I picked up the tablet, my entire body rigid with a cold, controlled fury. The only thing I'm guilty of is underestimating how far you would go to feel powerful again. My mother, drawn by our raised voices, appeared in the doorway, her face etched with distress. Marcus, you promised you would leave her things alone. Your daughter is lying to us, Clara, he thundered. She's playing a dangerous game, pretending to be some kind of international power broker. I'm trying to protect this family from the trouble she's going to bring down on us. By illegally searching my room and violating my privacy? I countered. He stormed out, brushing past my mother. Later, she came to me, her eyes pleading. Leona, please. I know this is awful, but leaving now will only make him think he's won, that he's scared you off. Your apartment will be ready in a few more weeks. Can you just hold on? Reluctantly, I agreed. But I called Simon Cale again. The situation is untenable. He's accessing my devices and running illegal background checks. This is now an active operational security risk. I'm authorizing your immediate relocation, Leona, Simon said, his voice firm. This has gone too far. We'll have a diplomatic security team there in the morning. I understand, I said. But he's a retired cop. If I vanish overnight with government agents, he's liable to report me as a missing person or a national security threat to his local buddies. It could get messy. You have 24 hours to extricate yourself gracefully, Simon conceded. After that, we're coming in, messy or not. The Serena situation is at a tipping point. We can't afford any more distractions. That night, an urgent, encrypted alert came through on my secure device. The fragile ceasefire in Serena had collapsed. Heavy fighting had erupted near the city where our largest field hospital was located. I had to coordinate an emergency evacuation. A top-level, secure video conference with the UN Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, the Aegis Field Commander, and a liaison from the French military was scheduled for 0800 the next morning. Leaving would have to wait. I lay awake for hours, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house, now imbued with a new menace. I could hear the floorboards creaking in the hallway as Marcus paced, his restless energy a palpable force outside my door. The confrontation was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. All I could do was prepare. At 0500, the first hint of gray light was filtering through the Pacific mist. I rose and began my preparations. The house was shrouded in a deep quiet, broken only by the distant call of a foghorn. I powered up my secure communications suite, the hum of the encryption hardware a comforting sound in the tense silence. The briefing documents from Serena painted a grim picture. Our people were trapped between advancing government forces and rebel factions. The decisions made on this call would be the difference between life and death. At 0630, I heard Marcus's alarm. He was usually out the door by 0700 for his morning coffee and walk around the marina, a rigid routine he'd maintained since retirement. This would give me the clear window I needed for the 0800 call. But 0700 came and went. I heard him moving about the kitchen, the clatter of his coffee mug on the granite countertop unnecessarily loud. At 0730, my mother knocked gently. Leona? Marcus is not feeling well. He says he has a migraine. He's staying home today. My heart sank. He had never had a migraine in his life. This was a deliberate act. He was waiting. Thank you for letting me know, Mom, I said through the door, my voice a mask of calm. I have an extremely important call at 8. I cannot have any interruptions. I'll make sure of it, she promised, but her voice was thin with worry. At 0755, I initiated the connection, my fingers flying across the keyboard, entering passcodes and biometric authentications. As the system established its secure tunnel to Geneva, I saw the faces of my colleagues appear on the screen: Simon Cale, UN Undersecretary General Rousseau, and Colonel Olivier Marchal of the French Armed Forces. Good morning, Director Vale, Rousseau began, his face grim. The situation on the ground has deteriorated rapidly. Let's begin. As our field commander in Serena began his live report, I was acutely aware of a presence in the hallway. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel him. The old house seemed to hold its breath. I kept my posture relaxed, my focus on the screen, but every nerve was on high alert. 20 minutes into the call, as we were mapping out the potential evacuation routes, I heard a faint, metallic sound at the door. The doorknob was turning, slowly and silently. I held up a hand to my colleagues on screen and muted my microphone. "Marcus, I am on a secure call," I said, my voice low and clear. "Do not enter this room." The handle stopped turning. For a moment, there was silence. I unmuted my microphone. "My apologies. Please continue, Colonel." Colonel Marshall was detailing the position of his peacekeeping troops, outlining a narrow corridor of opportunity, when a thunderous crack echoed through the room. The oak door splintered around the lock and burst inward. Marcus stood there, his face a mask of triumphant fury. In his hand, he held a pair of his old police-issue handcuffs. "Hands up." "On the floor now," he roared, as if storming a meth lab. On my screen, the faces of the Undersecretary General and the French colonel froze in disbelief. This was a breach of security of the highest order. "Simon," I said into my microphone, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "We have a hostile breach. Initiate protocol Nightingale." I repeat, Nightingale is compromised. It was our code for an extreme security failure requiring immediate external intervention. Simon's eyes widened in understanding before the screen went black, the system automatically severing the connection and wiping the local cache to protect the sensitive information that had been discussed. Marcus advanced on me, holstering his non-existent gun but brandishing the cuffs. "You are impersonating a government official and conducting unauthorized intelligence operations," he declared, his voice ringing with self-righteous conviction. "I am placing you under citizen's arrest until the proper federal authorities can be notified." "Marcus, you have no idea what you're doing," I said, standing slowly. He grabbed my arm with surprising force, twisting it behind my back. "Don't I?" "I heard you. Colonel. Peacekeeping forces. You're in over your head, playing some fantasy game that's going to get people killed." My mother appeared, her hand flying to her mouth, a small cry escaping her lips. "Marcus, my God, what are you doing?" "I'm doing my duty, Clara," he shouted, not looking at her. "I'm stopping this before she ends up in a federal prison or worse." The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around my wrists. The click was unnervingly loud in the suddenly silent room. He forced me to my knees. "You think you're so important," he sneered, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fury. "Sitting in this room, playing pretend. I was a real detective. I protected people from real threats. You're a deluded little girl playing make-believe." He pushed me forward, and I fell to my hands, the cuffs digging into my wrists. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sharp, but beneath it was a strange, icy calm. I knew exactly what Protocol Nightingale had set in motion. "Marcus," I said, my voice muffled by the carpet. "In approximately 5 minutes, you are going to deeply regret this. I strongly advise you to take these cuffs off me." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "More threats? Are you going to call your friends at the UN to come save you?" "Not the UN, no," I said quietly. "But you'll want these off before my security detail arrives." His knee pressed into my back. "You don't have a security detail, Leona. You have a fancy title at a charity and an overinflated ego. It's over." My mother was sobbing in the hallway, fumbling with her phone. She was probably calling 911, which would only complicate the jurisdictional nightmare that was about to unfold. 3 minutes had passed. I knew the Diplomatic Security Service, DSS, had a field office in Seattle. I knew their response time for a Nightingale alert was under 10 minutes. "Last chance, Marcus," I said. "Shut up," he snapped, but for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. My utter lack of panic was clearly beginning to unnerve him. And then we heard it. Not the wail of a local police siren, but the quiet crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. The sound of multiple car doors opening and closing with practiced efficiency. Marcus scrambled to the window, his bravado finally cracking. His face went pale. "What the hell?" he whispered. There are 3 black sedans out there. That would be them, I said, pushing myself up to a sitting position. I suggest you put away your toys, Marcus. They won't be as patient as I've been. His hand, which had drifted toward his hip where his gun used to be, dropped to his side. Heavy, measured footsteps came up the porch steps. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled the front door. Diplomatic Security Service. Open the door. Clara, don't you dare open that door. Marcus yelled, but it was too late. I heard the door swing open, followed by low, professional voices. My mother, bless her, was directing them to the study. A tall man in an impeccably tailored dark suit appeared in the shattered doorway, his eyes sweeping the room in a single, practiced glance. He took in the broken door, my mother weeping in the hall, Marcus standing over me, and my hands cuffed behind my back. His gaze, cold and assessing, finally rested on me. Director Vale, he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Are you harmed? Marcus stared at him, dumbfounded. Director who? 2 more agents, equally impassive and professional, filed in behind the first, creating a silent, formidable barrier in the doorway. The lead agent's eyes never left Marcus. You are interfering with the official duties of Director Leona Vale of the Aegis International Relief Organization, who currently holds diplomatic status for the duration of this operation under UN Mandate 2471. You will release her immediately. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked from the agent to me, his mind visibly struggling to process the information. That's not possible. She works for a charity. Her work in Sarina is a joint humanitarian mission with the full backing of the UN Security Council, the agent stated flatly. I will not ask again. The key. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The entire foundation of Marcus's reality, his authority, his perception, his carefully constructed narrative of my life, crumbled in that one devastating moment. He fumbled in his pocket, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grasp the small key. He stumbled toward me, his movements wooden, and unlocked the cuffs. The moment my hands were free, the agents moved. One helped me to my feet while the other 2 stepped toward Marcus. Sir, the lead agent said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, you are being detained for assaulting a diplomatically protected person and interfering with a secure federal communication. You have the right to remain silent. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide with a million questions. Leona, they called you director. A UN mandate? I turned to her, rubbing my bruised wrists. It's my job, Mom. I'm the director of Global Crisis Response. I couldn't tell you the details. It was for your safety and for the safety of my teams. She looked at Marcus, who was now being quietly but firmly led from the room, his own handcuffs now securing his wrists. His face was a canvas of shock and shame. Ma'am, the lead agent, whose name I now knew was Davies, said to me, we need to move you to a secure location. The breach has put the Sarina evacuation in jeopardy. You need to reestablish command. I nodded, turning to my mother one last time. I have to go. We'll talk, I promise. Marcus, she whispered, her gaze following her husband. He'll be treated fairly, I said. But there will be consequences. As Davies escorted me out of the house, I passed Marcus in the hallway. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The saddest part, Marcus, I said, my voice just for him, is that I would have told you everything eventually. If you had ever shown me the respect of believing in me, instead of needing to tear me down to build yourself up. Outside, the quiet coastal street was a scene of controlled, silent action. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, their morning routines disrupted by the sight of dark sedans and men in suits. As I slid into the back of the lead car, I took one last look at the house. My mother stood in the doorway, a fragile figure caught between 2 worlds, the one she thought she knew, and the one that had just been violently revealed. In that moment, amidst the chaos and the betrayal, I felt a profound and aching sense of release. The charade was over. The truth, in all its complicated and painful glory, was finally free. In the 6 months since that tumultuous morning in Port Blossom, the seasons have turned, both outside and within my own life. The Sarina evacuation, though jeopardized by the security breach, was ultimately successful. From a secure command center at a nearby military base, I re-established contact and, using one of our contingency plans, guided my team and 200 civilians to safety through the very corridor Colonel Marshall had outlined. The relief of knowing they were safe was a balm on the raw wounds of the day's personal events. Marcus's situation was handled with the discretion I had requested. He faced a federal tribunal, not a public court. The charges were serious: interference with a secure communication of national importance and assault on a protected person. The psychological evaluation I had insisted upon became a central part of the proceedings. It revealed a man whose identity was so profoundly fused with his former authority that he experienced my professional success and secrecy not as a point of pride, but as a direct, personal threat to his own sense of self. He couldn't be the man of the house if he wasn't the most important, knowledgeable person in it. He was given a suspended sentence, mandated to intensive therapy, and stripped of his pension for the gross misuse of his law enforcement credentials. The loss of his pension was, I suspect, a far greater punishment than any jail time would have been. It was the final, official erasure of the identity he had clung to so desperately. My mother, Clara, was the quiet hero of this story. After the initial shock subsided, a new kind of strength emerged in her. She stayed in Port Blossom for another 2 months, packing up her life with a quiet resolve. She filed for divorce. "I love him, Leona," she told me during one of our long phone calls, "but I love my daughter more. And I cannot live with a man who needed to see you broken to feel whole." She has since moved to a charming little cottage in Virginia, not far from D.C., and has started volunteering at the Library of Congress. We see each other weekly. Our relationship, once based on loving omissions, is now rooted in a profound, open honesty. We are discovering each other all over again, not just as mother and daughter, but as women. I agreed to one final, mediated meeting with Marcus 3 months ago. He sat across from me in a sterile therapist's office, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of his bluster and certainty. "I convinced myself you were in danger, or that you were lying," he said, his voice raspy. "I think the truth is, I was the one who was in danger of becoming irrelevant." "My success was never a reflection on you, Marcus," I told him, not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness. "I know that now," he said, looking at his hands. "My therapist says I have to learn to find value in who I am, not what I do, or what authority I hold over others. It's the hardest work I've ever done." We left it there. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was something quieter and perhaps more useful, an acknowledgement of the truth. It was an ending. Professionally, my life continues its demanding pace. The incident led to a review of our security protocols for remote work, and we now have better support systems for personnel who live double lives, balancing classified work with family who cannot know the truth. Simon Cale told me it was a wake-up call for the whole organization. Last month, I was asked to give the commencement address at my alma mater. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of hopeful faces, I thought about authority, respect, and the quiet power of competence. I didn't tell them my story about Marcus, not in detail. But I told them this: your worth is not a currency that you trade with others. It is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It is the solid ground of your own integrity, your own knowledge, your own compassion. Build your life on that ground. Some people will be unable to see the magnificent structure you are building. They will be blinded by their own small windows and low ceilings. Do not shrink yourself to fit into their limited view. Let them be. Your work, your truth, your impact on this world is the only testament you will ever need. As I look toward the future, I carry the lessons of that painful time with me. True strength isn't about control, it's about connection. True authority isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, it's about being the one who listens most deeply. Marcus tried to put me in handcuffs, to bind me to his narrow perception of who I was. In the end, the only person he imprisoned was himself. In breaking free, I didn't just reclaim my own story, I inadvertently forced him to start writing a new one for himself. Sometimes, the most profound acts of liberation are the ones we never intended. And sometimes, the truth arrives not with a gentle knock, but by breaking down the door.